Right, could just see the participants going up now. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Fair Game's second workshop. Obviously, what we're trying to do is we're a collection of football clubs that are trying to change football for the better. Our numbers have been growing quite significantly over the last couple of weeks, and we've had some really interesting interactions. Today, we're going to have some fantastic presentations. We've got Mark Bradley, from the founder of Fan Experience Company, who'll be talking a bit about how fans can get involved in football and how that experience can be improved. Mark had actually did, as part of his experiment, to 30 consecutive games with his family. So he's got a whole kind of idea of what it looks like and what it feels like. So that was great. Admittedly, he's a Sunderland fan, so we all have slightly different experiences about all of that. And then I'm absolutely delighted as well to have Darren Blinstein from Bury AFC, who will be able to tell us exactly why, basically one of the motivations for why we're here, the story of Bury and how they've taken that forward. Darren is also a football expert in a whole range of things. His experience in football goes back many, many, many years, and I'll let him explain a bit about that later on. So that's kind of what we'll do in the morning. Then we have a brilliant panel later on, which Ian Mather from Cambridge United will be chairing. That'll be at 11:30. And we'll be able to take questions and stuff throughout all of that. I'll be monitoring the questions as we go on. Just to give you a quick update, as I want to do, tell you where we are with Fair Game and what's been happening. We had a wonderful meeting last night, and you may have seen on Twitter that we've done a partnership of some sort with Her Game Too, which is a fantastic new initiative by some women fans that have been basically wanting to tackle sexism. John and I were in that meeting last night, and I think, John, we can safely say we were inspired by their energy and enthusiasm to tackle what remains quite a significant issue within our game. So we've been working with them, and you'll be able to see that on Twitter. And by all means, I'd encourage you to follow Her Game Too and look at what we're doing in terms of that interaction. So that's been brilliant. This week, we've also been meeting, we had a wonderful meeting, myself and Gavin, the chairman of Newport County, met Rick Parry, the chief executive of the EFL. We had a really productive meeting about that and our kind of common goals and common ambitions about how we want to take football forward and improve it. And there's quite a lot of crossover, but where we have the fantastic opportunity is the amount of academics and expertise that we've been gathering that's going to help shape the realistic solutions to football. And it's great to say that Rick Parry was very supportive of that initiative that we're taking and we're leading on. So that was very, very, very positive. In terms of clubs, I'm meeting 3 different clubs. I won't name them here today. Hopefully they'll all come on board. And I know that we'll have a couple of clubs that will be listening in to today's session as well. Hopefully they're taken by what we're doing, and we can add that little bit of extra snow to the snowball that we're creating and the avalanche that is hopefully leading towards significant football change. On top of that, I'm also meeting Kick It Out today. Their chief executive got in contact after the meetings I had over the weekend, and we're hopefully have some interesting relationships to be built with them. So I feel that football's really coming together, and just a huge, huge thanks to all of the people that are on the panels today, on the presentations today, and those of you listening in, because we are creating a real significant momentum, and it's all down to you who are listening in and to our panelists and academics that are bringing us together and actually moving us towards ultimately what I believe is a fairer game for football. Politically wise, we now have meetings set up with Andy Burnham, that's come through only yesterday. We're also meeting Alison McGovern and obviously Tracy Crouch. So there's a lot of political will that's happening as well, and we'll be pushing forward, and we've been reaching out to several other MPs, particularly those within the Fair Game constituencies. So that's been an amazing element. Obviously, if people want to ask me any further questions about what we're up to, it's easy to find me. I'm niall.cooper at the donstrust.org, which you can tell by that big Don's Trust logo in the middle of the screen that tells you which club I might perhaps be part of. But we're all here together to support each other. And particularly, there's a nice note from David Burgess, the Accrington Stanley Chief Executive this morning, who, while he can't make it because Accrington Stanley have got a number of their staff that are on furlough, he wishes us all the best and is more than happy that we're his 12th man today, and that's what we're trying to do, and back and support and bring all our clubs together. So it's an exciting time, lots and lots happening. I'll just pass on to our brilliant ambassador, John Scales, who's also been outreaching to numerous clubs this week as well, and been raiding his little black book, which is, in my view, feels like a very big black book, and helping us out as much as he can as well. John, over to you for a couple of quick words.
Yeah, I think you've said most of the things there, Niall. Morning, everybody. It's great to have Mark and Darren on the line, and of course Ian, who's going to chair the panel, as you said this morning, and Dan and everybody else that's really sort of come together. As Niall said, you know, the experts that we've put together and then have sort of volunteered to come on board and support and be part of this sort of movement in many ways. Acting in concert with the clubs and on behalf of the clubs. I think it's a pretty formidable team. That's because everybody is committed to wanting to see great changes within the game. We all share that common purpose, common goal, which is great, because so many people have said, it's to me, they've said, what's the point? It's impossible. It's actually not impossible at all. The strides we've made in the last sort of couple of weeks have astounded me. You know, first of all, look, I'm a former player. I was privileged to play football. You know, to be a footballer and have that lifestyle and enjoy the things I did. You know, I was very privileged to be able now to be part of this, to feel like I can contribute something, some little part of this, and be part of a great team is very exciting. So well done to everybody for playing a part in that. As Niall said, you know, the experts have the ability to shape policies, sustainability solutions, put forward on behalf of the clubs, what needs to be done, what can be done, what's achievable, and what a consensus can be built around those sorts of things. So it's really important, you know, this early stages this morning to look at things, to challenge it, to say things that in a forum that can be challenged, because otherwise it's all too sort of not treading on eggshells and everything else. We need to discuss, you know, what we all feel is wrong with the game, what's right with the game, what consensus can be built, and challenge that. And therefore in the afternoon we can really work on solutions. So you know, I'm speaking to, you know, a number of clubs, politicians, people I know in and around the game. I've been privileged as well, having played, that doors have opened in the life since I finished playing 20 years ago. So you know, again, just working together, it's amazing how this team has been built, how the organisation has grown in the last week, even the last week. So great strides this week. Looking forward to today and tomorrow and next week, the second, third and fourth workshops. So really excited to be part of it. So thanks for attending, thanks for coming on, and thanks for all the support from everybody.
Brilliant. I hope you all noticed my daughter waving in the background to say, you know, good luck to you all. That's clearly what she was doing. Without further ado, what I'm going to do is briefly ask Darren just to introduce a bit about his background, and then we'll hear the story of Barry, and we'll just take a couple of questions. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well, so if you have got any questions, do put them in the chat, and then we'll go to Mark after that as well. But big welcome to everybody, and Darren, over to you. I'll turn off my video so you don't have to get distracted by my mug, and let you take the stage. Darren, over to you.
Thanks, Niall. So to introduce myself, my name is Darren Blinstein. I'm currently a lecturer in football business and marketing at the UCFB in the Etihad campus. But previous to this, I've had a career in football and sport in general. I worked at the FA in a variety of roles for 8 years. I was customer services manager at the Football League for 5 years before that. Also worked at a club for Charlton Athletic back in their Premier League days, but also worked in Ireland for the Football Association of Ireland and the League of Ireland over there. So yeah, a range of experience within the game. And I guess also a huge Bury fan, and hence why I'm here. I was very fortunate to be elected onto the board of the new club, Bury AFC. The chairman, Phil Young, sends his apologies. He was originally going to do this talk. He can't be available this morning, but will be on the call this afternoon. So in terms of that brief introduction to myself and why I'm here, yeah, I am representing the club today, and I'm really proud to be able to do that. But the reasons for our existence are in some ways still quite painful to talk about. And as Niall said, it's our experience that hopefully frames this debate and this movement that has started. And our story is one that for many clubs at the moment it's a real case of there, but the grace of God go I. You think about Derby, Sheffield United, Charlton, Bolton, Wigan, Blackpool, Oldham, and also we need to keep an eye on Rochdale. There's strange things happening there, and the National League, that seems to be in meltdown. So the question to me is who's next? We probably aren't going to be the last. But these clubs' names, they change, but the names of the protagonists involved in them change as well, and the amounts involved might be different, but it's all typified by bad governance, over ambition, which is spending, and somewhat a level of ego. Debbie Jevons said on our expulsion from the Football League, we've learned lessons, but what lessons have been learned? What change has actually happened in the 2 years since we were expelled from the league? So, if we're really striving for sustainability, are financial fair play rules working? Are the salary caps working? Something seems systematically wrong when clubs such as Harrogate and Sutton are promoted to the Football League with sustainable models, 3G facilities hired out to the community to create and drive consistent revenue streams. But on promotion, their facilities are torn up. That doesn't seem to be the right way forward. So that's a brief introduction. I'll give a quick bit of background to how the demise of the club happened, what the legacy's been, where we are now, and then sort of look through various lenses what could have been different, and potentially moving forward what should have been different. So for me, the demise of Bury Football Club was a long process. It felt like death by a thousand cuts. Most people look to the last sort of 2-5 years, but actually throughout the club's 130 odd year existence, it had been on the brink a number of times. The club epitomised a boom and bust philosophy. And in my times as a fan, I'd seen wholesale departures of players. 1991, 1999, we staved off implosion by just selling all our players. Following that, there was an administration in 2002, and there was a major campaign led by Neville. But in some ways, that led us in terms of local rivals, renaming us from the Shakers to the Bucket Shakers. But we survived this and we limped on until, again, we faced financial ruin in 2013. And this is where it went up a few notches. Because up until then, had nobody noticed that the model being employed just wasn't working. At no stage did we think about sustainable growth. And again, I think that's something Mark's going to come on and talk about later. So when Stuart Day bought the club, a property developer, which always strikes fear into every football fan, buying a club, he took on a debt of about just over £1.5 million, and in his first season, there were nearly £750,000 worth loss made. But he had a dream. He had a 5-year plan. He wanted to get us in the Championship. He had plans for a 20,000-seater stadium that would drive 24/7 revenue streams. He had a car park scheme to raise money where spaces were leased out for £10,000 a go, with the promise to investors of a large return on investment. So there are people in the Cayman Islands that own parking spaces on Gig Lane, and it's quite clear they've never been to Gig Lane. It's not the Cayman Islands, and it's certainly not London, and you're not going to get the return on investment. But most football fans know crowds don't flock to Gig Lane. There's about 3,000 of us. We were signing players like Jermaine Beckford, Leon Clark, James Vaughan. They started playing for us, and we reportedly bought a player called Harry Bunn for $500,000. And this is us. This is Bury. So things didn't stack up, but we dreamt. But it was Bury. Bury, if you remember, Elton Wellesby described us as a ragtag and bobtail outfit, but we were spending, literally millions on players. And it was an expensive dream. Accumulated losses were 3.8 million at the end of 2012-13, but this had spiraled to just under 14 million a few years later by the end of the 16-17 season. So once again, facing financial ruin, over the hill came another knight in shining armour by the name of Steve Dale, and he bought the club for £1 in December 2018, taking on all the debts. Crucially, the sale was allowed to go through without the Football League having the chance to do a fit and proper persons test. And the meaning of this was that crucial paperwork and eligibility had happened after the horse had bolted. It was too late. It was too late at all. So there's clearly, it shows a weakness between a Football League regulation that showed either a lack of ability to implement their own rules, or that the rules just weren't effective. And which one, I guess, doesn't really matter, because what happened. But as he took over the club, he immediately stopped all payments to anyone that was owed money. And from March 2019, all the players stopped getting paid as well. But even a cursory look at Companies House would have seen a record of Steve Dale had around 40 insolvencies. It was clear that the club had been sold to an asset stripper. And as if to demonstrate this, immediately any assets that were involved in the football club were sort of hived off to sister companies that he'd set up. And then all of a sudden, on a match day, you could only pay cash. So the final match against Port Vale, 6,700 fans paying £20 each in cash. That's about 130,000 created in cash, disappearing, and still the players went unpaid. So in that last game, it was a really strange atmosphere. We were celebrating promotion, but at the same time was this eerie feeling that something seriously was in bad shape behind the scenes. And then administration happened in the close season. And to cut a long story short, there were strange goings on happening in the CVA process. There was a 7 million debt to Stuart Day, and that was mysteriously bought for £20,000 by a company owned by Steve Dale, the new owner's daughter, giving Dale a majority sort of shareholding of the debt and a huge say over the creditors' decisions. But there's lots of this has been written up by David Kahn and Kieran Maguire. So I'm not going to waste too much time on the intricacies of the finances, because it's just not my expertise. But after months of wrangling between the Football League and Steve Dale, that proof of funds just weren't provided to prove that the club would service the CVA and complete the season. And enough was enough. And we were out and expelled from the league after 125 years of membership on the 27th of August 2019. But even in those dying minutes, there was an offer by Bill Kenwright of Everton of £1 million to help out, but it was turned down by the league because of his involvement in another club. Potentially a further opportunity to save the club. It's also stalled due to the deadline being over a bank holiday, and the lawyers were on leave. It felt like, as a fan, resistance was futile, and we were being made an example of. But the issue is that the club is not dead. Where we are today, as a business, it's still registered at Companies House. But as a football club, it doesn't even have an FA membership anymore. It's lapsed, and this has caused real difficulty because it has split the fan base. Some have moved on, thinking the club will never be revived, hence why Bury AFC is in its existence. But the truth is, if somebody is out there willing to buy a decrepit stadium with a club of £13 million worth of debt, with no team, no manager, no league place, no infrastructure, but they're doing it for the shield of Bury FC, obviously they would do that, wouldn't they? Or is it just an opportunity to clean some money up and use it as a laundry? So some people have moved on because they can't see the reality of that ever coming back. But some still hold out, almost religiously, that there's going to be a second coming of the Shakers. We're not dead, so we must be alive, and we're buried till we die, aren't we? So we fight on. And as I say, it's split the fan base, not 50-50, probably 80-20 or a little bit less. But the passion of the fans, that they're still grieving. They're still grieving for a loss. And while I don't agree with them that the old club is salvageable, I can certainly understand why they can't let go. So in April 2020, Bury AFC was born following a number of public meetings, and we were created as a community benefit society. One member, one vote. We've got over 100 volunteers doing all manner of tasks to get things operational. Our vision, our published vision, is to bring sustainable league football back to Gig Lane. We're transparent in everything we do. We publish our accounts monthly for members and the wider public to see. And given the financial irregularities, misdemeanors, whichever you want to call it, of the past, we've got nothing to hide. We're playing in step 6 of the National League system in the Northwest Counties Division 1 North, which is the 10th tier of English football. But in all truth, and I think I could speak for a lot of our fans, we don't really care. We've got some kind of club back. It doesn't really matter. And as a board, we're committed to having this club represent our town and be a central part of the community, because we know many people's livelihoods and lives have been affected by the club going to the wall. I go with my friends, my nephew, now my son, and my dad when he's feeling up to it. And this season, my daughter's old enough and she's asking to go. She likes football. She likes watching it with her dad. And that's what they took away. That's what they took away. The memories, the promotions, relegations, they're like Albert. They bookmark your life and your fandom. And yeah, there's a cachet attached to being a league club. We were a league club for 25 years. But what they took away was that social glue from so many people. And we got so many letters from fans thanking the volunteers for bringing back something for them to get behind. And people really did have some serious mental health issues as a result of losing their club, dealing with that grief, almost as a bereavement of a family member. But the numbers are incredible. Momentum is growing. In our first COVID hit year, we sold 1,650 memberships. We've sold over 2,000 replica shirts. This year, we're already at 560 season ticket holders. We've developed a relationship with a local women's team. So we've now got 8 women's teams, as well as the men's senior team. We've set up a community trust with full charitable status. We've got 22,000 followers on Twitter, a YouTube channel with a weekly TV show. The work of the volunteers is just phenomenal, and it's humbling. But we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be selling tickets to a shared stadium in Radcliffe. So what could have been done? And obviously, lots of thought has gone on. Hindsight's easy. It's okay saying what should have happened, but we need to remember football is governed by its rule books. What could and what should have happened are different. Could is reflective, and we should be cautious that hindsight does have 20/20 vision. But we need to learn those lessons that David Jevons spoke about to point us what should happen going forward. It's easy to point the finger at the FA and the EFL. They're culpable, yeah, but the issue is wider for me, having reflected and thought about this quite considerably. It's clear there were systematic failures by both organisations. One chose not to take its responsibilities as the governing body. When it happened, working in the FA, it was very hard to take. But they devolved responsibility to the league. They took, the chairman told in front of a parliamentary subcommittee, and you could see the astonishment of the sitting members of that group. So could a stronger FA with a little bit more focus on the bits of the game between England and the FA Cup and grassroots football have entered debate and acted earlier? Probably, most definitely. But is the rule book fit for purpose when the size of, for example, a sponsor's logo on the shirt can get more scrutiny than conditions of purchasing a club and its stadium? But remember, and all this probably could be done. But remember, the game is governed by its rule books. If you put the FA's rule book, the Premier League and the Football League's rule books together, there's thousands of pages of rules. But for the FA, Bury weren't breaking their rules. So why get involved? Leave it to the Football League. Let them take the flag. The FA weren't taking away our membership, so let it rest. So what about the Football League? Well, again, we've got to look at the rule book. We, as a club, persistently broke the rules. We were kicked out of what is effectively a members' club. But when you take those rose-tinted glasses off, we consistently failed to pay other clubs. Other clubs on the call might have lost out money because Bury said they would buy players and didn't pay their bills. Players weren't paid. Other bills to local companies weren't paid. We didn't comply with the rule book, and it must be remembered that the Football League's rule book are the club's rules. The clubs decide the rules. So the Football League is merely an organising body that implements rules of its members. So we broke our own rules that the club had voted on. And of course, things could have been done better. There could have been a stronger application of what was called the salary cost management protocol. Absolutely, that could have happened. But surely alarm bells were ringing. Again, when I worked for the Football League, I sat next to the desk where the transfer fees and the contracts used to come in. Surely somewhere within that system, someone knew the debts the club were getting into, the debting owed to all the clubs, and the wage income ratio for the club was just out of control. So could they have followed their own rules on the fit and proper persons test? Absolutely they could. But again, does that highlight either ineffectiveness of the rules that weren't implemented, or an inability to implement them full stop? And also there's another factor about relationships and better leadership, because action should have happened well before it got to that stage. I can't help but think back to my time at the Football League under the stewardship of Andy Williamson, for example. His relationship with the clubs was really, really good, and I just can't believe he would ever have let it get to that stage. So with the hand washing situation of the FA and an inability to act at the Football League, 2 years later, has anything changed? And if it has, are we just simply papered over the cracks? It's easy to point the finger elsewhere. And it's true, many Bury fans were taken in by Stuart Day and the players that were coming into the club. We have to remember, many fans fuel this ambition and the desire for success. But they tend not to ask questions where the money is coming from. Certainly for us, there were people asking the questions, but were shouted down at times. But a key issue is that the industry needs to reframe what success is. They need, with sustainable growth, community, fan engagement, and relations are there as important as trophies, promotion, and the balance sheet. And we need a reset of that culture and of what is important. In football, there's lots of finger pointing, but as Bury fans, we have to look at ourselves as well and what our role in this was. Because the very group of people that should have been holding the owners to account, the wider fan base, but Forever Bury, which is the supporters trust, was all the time cozying up to the owners, supporting crazy ideas of super stadiums and spending too much money on players and organising fundraisers like beer festivals and car boot sales. Excuse me. And when they did pick up the pieces, they did an incredible effort. It was just too late. It was too late to save the club. People put hours and hours and hours in to try and save it, and it was just too late. So we need to get the governance right, not just of the authorities, but of our own fan groups. Excuse me. But as fans, we had to play our part, and we sleepwalked into it. We had a trust that was far from competent, and also we had a supporter base desperate for success. We were buried. Generally, we're rubbish, and we had been for a long time. But someone promised us that we wouldn't be, and it was amazing. And thinking about it, the year we finished, we got promotion, and it was probably a Pyrrhic victory. We had a miraculous promotion with players that weren't getting paid, but it masked what was going on. Had we been about to drop out the league, fans would have been irate rather than passive because they were enjoying the ride. And we needed to have that tenacity that the Blackpool fans had, or the Charlton fans had, to rid the club of their owners. And we didn't mobilise and realise what was happening quick enough. So these two owners were able to advance what they were doing. And the Football Supporters Association have been brilliant with us, with Bury FC, and they're true friends. And you just think, with more resource, could they have had their own licensing scheme for Supporters Trust that would have kept Forever Bury in check? Or, again, on reflection, was it just our trust that weren't up to scratch? I'm not sure. Maybe I say we were the exception to the rule, but maybe it was just that we were in the middle of a perfect storm: dodgy owners, huge debts, football authority ambivalence, wanting to make an example of us, and an ineffective supporter trust stroke fan base. But the desire to change can happen. This group, we've got to move the debate on from just putting pressure on to providing the clubs that are on this call that want to be part of this movement for change with the financial, the governance, and the political evidence to drive change from the inside is crucial. Because while a government review is welcomed and regulatory change is critical, regulatory change without the will to implement it will not change the culture, and many clubs will be forever looking at how to bend the rules, how to break the rules, how to do so without being detected. And my analogy is, if some clubs want to crash the car, then at least let's make sure they understand putting a seatbelt on is a good idea first if they're going to do that. So it feels like pointing fingers at this stage is a little futile. It's not going to bring us back. The authorities have got to look at a range of things. An annual financial licensing program, stronger and simpler system of salary caps, fit and proper persons test that actually works. Is there a need for a clearing house for transactions of club ownership, so that new owners can be properly vetted? Is there need for an emergency fund for compulsory purchasing of clubs when a certain threshold of pain has been reached? There's enough money, and there's other ideas and better ideas than this, but there's enough money in the game to make these happen. But we've got to have the need and the desire from all stakeholders to make these changes effective. So, on behalf of the members and supporters and directors of Bury AFC, we look forward to working with everybody, and to make the game better governed and regulated, so that other clubs' fans don't have to go through what we've been through. So thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. And back to you, Niall.
Thank you, Darren. Darren, that is, I think, a wonderful presentation, wonderful talk there that would have inspired a whole load of people. You probably sold a couple of extra Bury Air t-shirts on the back of it, I'll say. for us, I mean, I'm an AFC Wimbledon fan. I'm on the board of the Dons Trust, and some of the stories that you have said there resonate massively. And I think for fair game, the big thing is looking to create a fairer system that means that we learn heavily from the examples of what's happened to Bury. And for us, having you on board as a fair game club was an absolute essential, because we need to learn and we need to look at that and we need to get that experience and the insight that you could provide. And this is why we want those experts and those opinions to help shape what is realistic solutions. So for us, I think that's absolutely vital. And so we will be continuing our conversations with you, Darren, and it's wonderful to have you in some of our sessions later on and going forward and helping shape those policies and decisions. What I'll do is I'm just going to go, I will go to Mark in a minute. Just want to flag up that we have got an app running as well during today, which is VBox. As you can see it in the chat, and there's an ID to log into there, which will come up with surveys during the day. So it'll come up on your phone, so you can just see what we're talking about. The first question is about sustainability. So do have a look and log on to that, and then we'll be gathering that data as well and sharing some of those results throughout the day. Darren, obviously we'll come back to you there after we've spoken to Mark, but that's, I think for a lot of people, there's a lot to digest from what you've just said, and it really will have struck a chord with so many clubs that are worried about what happened to you and really care about you. And it's like I said earlier on, Dave Burgess from Acton Stanley isn't here today, but we said we'd be his 12th man, and Barry, we're your 12th man as well. So that's what we're here for, to try and make sure that we can support all the clubs that are fair game clubs and push us all forward in a positive light. Thank you very much, Darren. I'm now going to go to Mark. Mark's coming from a different level, but a wonderful bit of experience. One of the things we talked a bit about was sustainability, and that actually means not being neglectful of the people that help shape and create the opinions and views of clubs, and make sure that they are obviously one of your key revenues. And I think we just heard from Barry a little bit about the disconnect of the reality about what's going on and the transparency that was needed there that didn't exist, that really helps clubs thrive. To help explore all of that, Mark went on this wonderful journey of going to 30 consecutive Sunderland games. There's a hell of a lot more stories behind all of that than just the 30 games, and there's been a lot of experience and a lot of great talks, and it's been wonderful to engage with Mark before today just to get a bit of a sense about what he's going to be talking about. But Mark, perhaps an introduction, if you want to introduce yourself and then perhaps talk a little bit about that. I realise that you're just following Darren's very emotional Bury story, which is quite difficult to do, because I think it's probably taken a bit of a deep breath and a wonderful bit of engagement for that. But Mark, over to you, and really look forward to hearing what you've learned over the years and how that might help fair game clubs going forward as well. Over to you.
Okay,
I'll turn my thing off, Mark, so it's you're in capable, safe hands.
Like Darren, I chose the wrong time to have a coughing fit. Thanks for inviting me. I've got quite a range of different experiences before working in football, and it was my time, I guess, in the field of what you might call service excellence or customer engagement, that a lot of the things that my little organization practices now come from. I just have to correct Niall, it wasn't 30 consecutive Sunderland games. That's just the day job. This was 30 consecutive Football League matches in 2006-07, where we went as a young family. My kids would have been 10 and 7 at the time. My son, a big football fan, my partner and my daughter less so. And I'll explain a little bit about that as we go through. What I've brought along are a few little slides, because I think you'd much prefer to see them than me. So let me just open the slides. Hopefully you can see them. This is Katya. Katya's a friend of mine. She works for a club in Estonia. It's on the the eastern side of Tallinn. It's a suburb, Docks, quite a manufacturing area, largely Russian speaking, which of course much of Estonia is. Katya's job is community development officer. And this role evolved over the years until it was kind of finally put into play by UEFA in a program that they have called GROW. Now, on the face of it, this is to help member nations around UEFA, particularly developing ones, to increase participation in the sport, but also development. But for me, this role is fundamental to one area of sustainability that I want to talk to you about today, and that is sustainable attendance growth. So I guess the easiest way to put that is, maintaining or growing crowds without winning. We at Sunderland are doing the without winning bit quite well. It'll be interesting to see how well we've maintained crowds when the season starts. But what Katya's job is actually to do all of the things which my experience tells me are important to grow clubs. And the most obvious way you can grow clubs is to get people to come and enjoy the kind of communion with the club, which is the match day. And here she is on a match day, and she's very busy on a match day trying to drum up engagement. A lot of the clubs in Estonia, when this project started, had crowds of around 100, 150. I know you might think that's ridiculous, but it is a small emerging nation with a very small population where the weather means that most sports played indoors. So actually, then you add on a national side who, although they beat Lithuania the night before last, never win any games. So football is not the sport that it is in this country. So I guess it's even more difficult to grow attendances. So I just want to, come back to one of Katya's colleagues a little bit and try and link some of these things that we've talked about to think about what can we learn from the way that progressive organizations design themselves that can help us as football clubs and shall we say non-elite football clubs, the vast majority of us, to be able to grow attendances more sustainably. So, let me show you this. This is an imagined pyramid, but it reflects something that Sir James Timpson, he had a moment of truth many years ago now, probably 15, 20 years ago. He owns Timpson's, of course. We're all familiar with Timpson's. And he had a kind of a light bulb moment when he realized that if he wanted to grow through great customer experience and through customer advocacy and word of mouth and, providing great service to people who come to his shops, the whole organization needed to be focused on that. A little bit like the analogy of designing a Formula One race car. It could be that there's just a couple of screws that need to be lighter or in a different place, which when combined with all of these other tiny little changes, make sure the car not only goes in the right direction, but beats all the other cars. And I think one of the things that I've obviously observed over the years, and bearing in mind, I'm kind of, outside of football, not working, not actually in clubs, but working as an organization that supports leagues and associations and occasionally clubs, is that I've seen that there's kind of a lot of contradictory activity that goes in within a club, leading to a lack of focus on growing attendances. Often it's simply a case of promoting games or discounting tickets, neither of which is a sustainable strategy, which obviously I'm sure you're conscious of that. But what I haven't seen much really is an actual attempt to redesign football clubs so that their purpose, among their purposes, but if the pursuit of sporting glory is one, then actually being able to grow attendances is another. And what Sir James Timpson did was he actually looked at his hierarchy, and of course the Timpson's version of this would be the CEO at the top, then head office, then the branches, then the customers. But actually what this didn't do was facilitate the focus on customers. It actually looks like everybody is serving the chief executive. And of course, he simply did this. He turned it on its head. And this is kind of the way that from my experience, my little bit chipping in here, is that this would make a huge difference to the ability of clubs to be more sustainable, and specifically in the area of attendance. Because effectively what we're saying is that we take what progressive organizations do that are very good at growing through word of mouth, and that's effectively redesigning us to focus on the customers. If you apply this to football, then what you can see very clearly is that unless you're actually, if you're not directly supporting fans, which match day employees probably do, and ticketing teams, etc., then you must be helping someone who is. And I think by looking at it that way, you can see very clearly that we have an opportunity in football to actually move towards sustainability in terms of organizational design. I hope that's clear. Obviously, there's many different ways you can depict this, but I thought Sir James Timpson or Sir John Timpson, it's one of the two. One's the son, one's the father. And of course, the other thing about having a focus on the fan and having a focus on the match day experience, and this is just one little output of taking this approach, is that your match day teams have a purpose. And at this point, yeah, I will mention, it was back in 2006, 2007. I'd been working for an organization that was a service excellence membership company. So businesses would join us and we would take them on site visits to people wherever, in whatever sector, were doing things really, really well. And we also did some work, thanks to Kathy Long, who you met a couple of days ago, for the Premier League. And Kathy could see something in this idea of looking at things through the eyes of the customer, in inverted commas. And she introduced me to the gentleman you just heard, Darren Blinstein, when he was at the Football League. Darren and I have become good friends. We've known each other for years. And one of the things that Darren suggested was, wouldn't it be a good idea if you and your kids actually spent some time looking at the experience, the new family experience of Football League clubs? Now, part of the reason that we hit on this was because I'd written a book called Inconvenience Stores. Great title, didn't sell any. It's kind of like Alan Partridge, it's off to get pulped. But it was an attempt to actually gain insights into what mattered to businesses by simply collecting a load of experiences that my family had. And, you know, I still believe to this day that if you have 2 or 3 experiences of any particular service provider, you'll get an insight into what matters inside that business. And the question is usually whether customers matter or whether they don't. And so when Darren asked if we could do these visits, it was 15 different Football League clubs that we visited home and away during that entire period. The first game was a 1-1 draw between Swindon Town and Boston United. And Boston, yeah, whatever happened to them. And then finally, I think it was Chesterfield against Leyton Orient. Again, this was in a stadium which doesn't exist anymore, and a team that's in the National League. So what that showed us was that this, if we judged how focused clubs were on driving attendances on the experience that we got, we didn't see any kind of joined upness, for want of a better term. And one of the ways you can look at it is actually, one characteristic was that the people we met on a match day, and I'm talking particularly of stewards here, tended to range between passive and kind of unconscious and occasionally passive aggressive. They didn't reflect what the club internally wanted to reflect to fans. And clearly, if your focus as a club is simply to win, or to, and if you don't win, discount, then what can the contribution of matchday colleagues be? Just effectively, what can they do? What can they contribute? You know, other than being a ball boy that keeps the ball away from the opposition when you've 1-0 up with 2 minutes to go, there's very little that they can do. But if your focus is then to give a great experience for fans, whatever they are, whichever part of the community they come from, and wherever they're in the stadium, then that really untaps what the volunteers and the people that work at the club can do. So that's a little bit about what we're talking about. So here's the thing. This is what it is to me. It's when I worked as a judge for the British Service Excellence Awards, you're going back a long time now, about 20 years ago. One of the things that we did was, what other people did for us to use, was to develop a kind of a model that ensured that if businesses wanted to be customer focused and they wanted to grow through word of mouth and customer advocacy, then actually this would be done strategically and culturally by having a model, a holistic model that would drive it. You know, so I mean, here's a kind of an example of what doesn't work. You know, a business that decides to improve customer service puts everyone on a training course. Well, you know, you just think of that episode of The Office with the trainer eating his crisps while your man picks up his guitar. And the reality is, without a holistic approach, neither can we pursue sustainable attendance growth in clubs. So if you take the principles of that model that businesses have used in the past 20 or 30 years, that's kind of reflected that movement from manufacturing to services industry that dominates globally now, there are kind of 4 elements. And what we've done in our little organization is over the seasons and with the organizations we've worked, which predominantly the EFL, with whom we've had the longest relationship, started with Darren, currently work with Andy Pomfret, who fulfills the role that Darren used to fulfill. But we also work with the SPFL, with the FA, and as you'll see in a couple of slides, you know, around Europe too. And what we've done is we've kind of honed this. This has always been in the back of our minds, this model. Our core service is assessments. As many of you will know, we provide detailed assessments on different types of fan experiences to the different people we work with. We're probably best known for the Family Excellence Scheme in the EFL, but we've also worked with disabled supporters. We've worked with away fans. We've worked with core fans, if you like, with students, with young people, etc., etc. And this keeps getting reinforced. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, we need to have a holistic approach here. And, you know, without going into a great deal of detail, there are 4 elements to it. There's identity, and, you know, the club exists to achieve sporting glory. That's what we all want to do. But, you know, Sunderland's a great case of that not really working out too well. So what is the kind of, what is the deeper identity of the club? You could call it brand, but I don't like using the word brand in football. Neither do I like using the word customers. It's more meaning. It's the fundamental meaning of people. What does the football club represent to them? It could be childhood memories. It could be something more community-based, like an industrial heritage. There is something which defines every club and makes it different. And the extent to which clubs use their values and their identity will certainly determine how successful they're going to be with sustainable attendance growth. What we tend to see, and I think you'll probably agree with me, is that in most clubs, values are only ever mentioned when there's a new, I don't know, car supply corporate partnership deal being announced, when the CEO will say, we share the same values, and all our fans are out here sitting thinking, so what values are they exactly? You know, so I think that's key. The second bit is everything Kevin Rye espouses. It's this idea of being very close, working in partnership with the community as stakeholders, influencing the way the clubs are run, working in partnership on things that are strategic, but also basic. And that kind of takes us to the experience element, which is, you know, the antidote to the kind of miserable steward, you know, who isn't really helping to engage fans, is actually the club volunteer at Exeter City, for example, the ambassadors who are around the stadium on a match day, long-term fans who know the history of the club, who love it, who kind of bombarding families with questions and testing kids on what they know about the club. And it makes a completely different experience. And then, of course, finally, and most importantly, I think, is the people, the culture. Is sustainably part of the culture of the club? And while, of course, that's really important to come from the owner and the leadership team, it's got to be sustained in every part of the club. And the extent to which clubs prepare and develop match day teams to give that great experience is often a reflection as to how seriously they take this. So that's a bit of a nutshell. Obviously, you know, could talk for hours on this in terms of where it comes from and how it works. But that sits behind everything we do. We use the fan experience assessment as a catalyst to get clubs into a conversation about how could you make this more sustainable moving forward. And of course, what I would say is, you know, try do it yourself. Look at the things you do as a club. Get yourself a little spidergram like this and mark yourself. Start in the middle and say, okay, we're very strong. Do we use our values in terms of recruiting fans to games, getting fans to games? Do we have a deeper social purpose, for example? And, you know, you just have to, I mean, you can do it on a little kind of sliding scale. If you start with the club that just mentions values and press conferences, but then you move up to clubs like Liverpool and Barcelona, who are known for something else. In Barcelona's case, more than a club. I'm not sure how much more than the club they are after recent events, but also Liverpool, with you'll never walk alone, which everybody knows. So there's something transcendental going on there. It's much more than the football, and it helps bond the communities of those clubs closer to them. And in fact, in Barcelona's case, they engaged me to write an introduction to this whole area, sustainable growth, for their innovation hub and their little university. So I think it's important that we try and measure it. And we've talked about measures that's on the agenda today. Other measures, of course, that we can use. We can measure the quality of the touch points, the whole match day experience. Which are the bits that need to be better for different types of fans? We know that the needs of a new family with young kids are going to be significantly different to a returning core fan after COVID. So I think these are really important. A little bit about us. This is now where we're working. We work all over Europe now, and we do different things with different associations. You can see that Estonia there at the top. We're working with the Women's League in Finland, and down at the bottom right, we're working in Europe's poorest country too, which is Moldova. And if you think we have difficulties here in this country, the amount of match fixing and money laundering, you just don't ask. But what we're seeing is that the relevance of our model resonates everywhere, absolutely everywhere. In Denmark, by applying the model and delivering an assessment scheme, we were able to lift new fan attendance significantly in just one season. And we're talking about 15 to 20% in one season, just because the clubs actually put a focus on it. So here's a great example. Now, as you can see from the numbers here, this is very much scaled down from football league clubs. But remember, we're trying to make the whole game sustainable here. And I think that, smaller clubs are the ones who really need this. Now, Pärnu Vaprus is kind of on the Gold Coast of Estonia. There is actually a warm, kind of sunny side on the west coast, down towards Riga. And they had, as you can see, these red boxes at the bottom of the graph show their position in the Premium League, the top division in Estonia. But since 2018, they've spent 2 seasons in the second division. Now, Karin, who you can see there, Karin Lipstul, Karin comes from Pärnu. She knew a lot about marketing. She knew a lot about customer engagement. She knew absolutely nothing about football. And since her appointment, the club has actually effectively got up to nearly 600 fans average home game, even though they're a division lower than when they were at their previous level of 352. So I think it's important that leave that one for the time being. I think it's important that we think about what I'm talking about here. I'm not just talking about fan experience. What I'm saying is that a focus on the fan experience in the context of a sustainable attendance growth model actually works. And what it does is, for me, it addresses one of the most infuriating kind of aspects of football. And that is that the artifice that is used, let's say an organization like Starbucks. So Starbucks has a very consistent customer experience wherever you go in the world. But in reality, it's just selling coffee. It's just selling a commodity that you and I can probably make better at home these days. But the business grows exponentially. Maybe it doesn't pay its taxes, but it grows exponentially. And it does this on the basis of a customer experience that in effect is artifice, because what they sell is coffee. Now, if you compare that with football, football doesn't need the artifice, because as we know, football is here. Nobody goes to the local supermarket to spread their grandfather's ashes. People go to their football club. So we have the one thing that the vast majority of successful retail businesses out there don't have, and that's true meaning. But what we don't do is apply the model that makes those businesses successful. And I think if we put the two together, it could be a really useful cog in all of the toolkit that you're putting together. So just finally, just to share a couple of the results from down the years. The EFL, as you're probably aware, is in attendance terms, and especially in terms of direction of attendance, is probably the most successful league in Europe right now. In 2018, it reached its highest overall aggregate season attendance since 1959, which my dad says was the golden age of football, when Sunderland used to win the odd game. Now, that says something, and I think one of the reasons, and I could say that, but what clubs are doing is they're diversifying and extending their reach by looking at the experience and how it can be better for different types of people. And if we've played a small role in that's really good. To be fair to Cardiff City, they were the first club, when we first shared the results of our 30 consecutive games, they were the first club to really see this as an opportunity. And in the 4 years before they arrived in the Premier League, which I think was 2012, and of course had to start playing in red shirts, they went from 459 to 7,200 family season ticket holders, all because of what they did to take advantage of that extra large concourse that a certain previous owner had bequeathed to them. But then Odense in Denmark, OB, they grew their attendance by 30% in one season, just by creating a dedicated family stand. And we continue to support the Superliga with our assessment program. But I think the club that you should all look at is probably Bowes. Darren loves Bowes. Darren obviously lived and worked in Merrion Square in Dublin all those years ago. They are fan-owned. They are completely designed around the needs of their community. So they have community-led values, which is effectively told them where to go. And as they learn more about this, they're achieving some staggering results, which is in fact selling out more third shirts during the pandemic than they've ever done at any other time. They still have a kind of a stadium that's falling apart, but it's full. And what they've created, that Daniel Lambert, the chief operating officer there, tells me is the concept of the high quality fan. Now, we're all high quality fans because we buy into our clubs. But in growing clubs, if you have a strong holistic model that allows you to use your truer, deeper purpose as a club, then you can emulate what Bohemians have done. And it's actually quite astonishing. They have a club poet. They do rehabilitation sessions with prisoners in Kilmainham jail. Well, not Kilmainham, that's a museum, isn't it? But the local jail. And, they are working very closely with refugees. That third kit had refugees are welcome on it. And what that's led is also this syndrome of local and global. There are other clubs like that. San Pauli in Hamburg is a great example. But Lewis, with the work they've done on equality, Forest Green are now starting to build a global fan base because of their green approach, their bamboo shirt and specific, and corn pie is very interesting. So when you stand for something, you start to develop global followers who pick that up on digital, on social media, and start to follow. But I could, I don't want to talk any longer because I know we've got a tight agenda this morning. But hopefully, what that's done is giving you a little insight into the role that we play, but also the potential that taking a sustainable approach to attendance can have for clubs up and down the pyramid. So I hope that's been useful. Niall, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that was insightful again, and it's useful to kind of get a sense about where, when we're looking at fan engagement, and that's one of the key things that we were wanting to discuss going forward as a potential solution, and how we look at making sure that we encourage good practice and encourage ways of doing. What I wanted to just do before we break, we've got 10 minutes before we break, let's just come back a bit to Darren. And Darren, obviously there's a lot of stuff in there that kind of says about how we can move forward and what the potentials are and how we kind of secure our futures. And I just wanted to get a sense about what your views on what Mark just said, and how much that echoes with what could be a solution, a part of a wider solution for football, particularly given what happened to you and your club, and also your experience previously. So, Darren, just your thoughts on what Mark said.
Yeah, I mean, as Mark said, we've worked together for a long time, and absolutely echo those sentiments. And I think from a personal point of view, what's been really interesting about working with 100 or so other volunteers, is that within a fan base, and you'll know this from your Wimbledon experience, and other people on the call from their own angle, is that the amount of intelligent, well qualified people that are giving up their time to that, there's probably more resource within the fan base than there is that are within the club and the structures of a professional club. And what's been noticeable to me is that, having been involved as I am at the moment, that those people were always available. That expertise around business and finance and marketing was always available to the football club, but it was never tapped into, because there was almost this, going back to Mark's model of it's us and the fans, and there's a line between it, and we only ever ask for fans. You know, I'm a bit skeptical about the token fan on the board, because I just sense that unless there's really true welcoming onto the board of a football club, there'll be side meetings, and they'll just bypass the fan voice. So unless unless the culture's right, and actually everything about the club is to serve the supporter, then we won't really get any effective change. And let's say, for football clubs, tap into that fan base. People want to help, and there's a role for everybody, whether that's putting on a yellow steward jacket or whether that's sitting on a finance committee. Embrace the resource that you have. Don't just see fans as a cash cow, because the relationship and bond, as Mark says, is inherent sometimes, and it goes deep, and people, if they believe in what's going on, will give their time.
Thank you, Darren. I mean, I'm going to abuse my situation here of being a kind of chair of it, and I think it's important to take that on board. I mean, the AFC Wimbledon model was, we started from nowhere, and we went and said to our fan base, we need an accountant, and an accountant was found. We need somebody to operate the turnstiles, and we found a turnstile operator. We needed program sellers, and we found program sellers. We needed a person who was a football coach. We found a football coach. We needed somebody who knew how to design a kit. We found a kit designer. We needed somebody who could design a football stadium. We found a stadium designer. All of those things were amongst our fan base. And embracing that actually makes you a more sustainable club, because actually you've got people who live and breathe the club that are in your resources. And that for us was one of the big things. All of that said, is that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a fan board or a fan engagement fan on the board or whatever, but it's that knowledge that you have that skill set there, and embracing it and engaging it, from my view, is one of the things that we really want to explore at Fair Game, and really want to look at how we embed that, because that is a route to sustainability. It's a route to about making sure your club lives just beyond just the now, here and now, and doesn't go down the bit of gambling, financial future and the heritage and traditions of your club, because you've got people that can help and know the solutions and understand it. So you should never look at a club, in my view, as being just a few people that are just at the top, but look at it as all those people that are there wearing your shirts and supporting you and engage them. And the more you can engage them, the better you can be. That's my view. As a Fair Game, we represent the views of 10 clubs. So that's just me speaking personally and abusing my situation completely and utterly. But this afternoon session is really important for us. So those of you who are the experts in the room for that later on, with a chance to speak with the clubs, it's, give us the advice that we need, help us look at those solutions and look at how we can embed that and take it forward, because we want to create a better view for football in the future. And we want to learn from the people that we've gathered and the voices that we've had from yourself, Darren, from Mark, for several other people on the call, and lots of the other experts that we've been gathering. Because we haven't got all the solutions, but you're all football fans, and you've all got experts and ability to to create the best solution that we possibly can, and to make sure what happened to Bury doesn't happen again, and we learn heavily from that example. So it's great to hear from you, Darren. Great to hear from you, Mark. Mark, any other further comments you wanted to add before we break for 15 minutes?
No, just the last thing I would mention was this role, this idea of actually, just continuing where you were going before when you said we needed a kit designer, we found a kit designer, we needed a coach, we found a coach. And that is actually having somebody in that role where the responsibility is to pursue community engagement and to grow attendances. And of course, in Estonia, it's like going into schools, talking about the club. It's talking about the history of the club. It's working with municipal organizations, with the town's mayor and things like that. But it's actually just having someone in the hierarchy in the business who's responsible for engaging and growing attendances. Because we don't have measures. Most football clubs don't have a measure. Very few clubs have a measure of advocacy among people. As Alkmaar in the Netherlands send an email survey, just 3 questions, 2 hours after every home game to every ticket holder, whatever the results. And they simply say, score your experience today. Why do you say that? And what could we do better for you? And as a consequence of that, they know that when they make improvements, it's going to work. And that whole kind of holistic business approach is missing from the clubs who need it most. And I'm generalizing, but I think you know where I'm coming from. So that would be my last message.
Cool. And obviously one of the things that we're looking to do is create a model that will help clubs going forward. So that's one of the things that we've been espousing and trying to look at that as a kind of standard approach. Which doesn't have to be taken on fully on board, but it's an advisory and a kind of best practice thing that we want to be developing. With that, I'm going to finish a couple of minutes early, let everybody get a nice cup of tea and stuff like that, and we will see everybody back here in 15 minutes. Do download that app. We've got the questions and the surveys running. You can see the ID there as well to log in to get your answers and submit your questions and your thoughts. And we'll be running those throughout the day. And a huge thanks to the background IT team that are doing that, which is Marianne, who's from part of the Luton Supporters Trust, George Jones, who's helping run the IT stuff, who's from the Dons Trust, and Johnny Kerr, who's a Bristol Rovers fan, lots of other people in the background that you're totally not aware of that are helping us put on today and make sure it all runs smoothly. Without all of that, I will I will turn off my video and I will chat back in 11:30, and we'll be opening with the panel being chaired by Ian from Cambridge United. So go make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, grab a glass of water, and we'll see you all back here in 15 minutes. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to shout back and just let people slowly come back into the room. We've got a number of people just slowly drifting back. Just before we start, I'm just going to very quickly share screen on some of the results that we had from the morning session, if I can. Let's see if that works. So hopefully this will just show you very briefly what we were talking about in this early bit, and then I'll hand over to Ian, who will be able to hopefully share wonderfully the next bit. So we are asked a bit about sustainability. We had the brilliant Mark Bradley and Darren Blinstein from Bury talking about earlier on. And so these are some of the quotes that have come through already. So there are a whole range of interesting things there. Limits on players' pay, protecting the pyramids. And you can see some really nice quotes as well there that we got from this first morning session. And this is the kind of word cloud from this morning. So we've developed this and it's gone through. And you can see some really obvious things in there. Clubs as fair game. We're very, very, very happy. I'm sure Ian's also very happy that that's right bang in the middle as the biggest thing from today, which is really important. And other bits on there, things of regulation, financial, governance, pyramid, lots of things that we can see coming through. Just gives us a bit of a sense of what we were discussing in our first session. Obviously, all of this is coming through on the VBox app. So if you haven't downloaded that, please do. All of that details in the chat bar, along with the ID to log in. It helps us create the session a little bit more interactively. So that's what's going on in the background, just to let you know that we're doing some wonderful digital solutions. I'm going to hand over to Ian from Cambridge, and he'll talk you through for the panel for this second session of today. And we can see lots of people already on board. I'll be there in the background, along with our digital and IT team that are all kind of making sure everything runs smoothly. Any questions at all you have, put them in the chat, and we'll make sure Ian has the chance to raise those as and when. But Ian, over to you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Neil. And what a brilliant set of presentations we had this morning, and particularly picking up on the point that Darren made about how Bury got into the situation it was in. I was actually taking part in the vote which ended Bury's tenure in the league. And it was quite clear that, yeah, they had broken the rules, but they'd been allowed to break the rules. And we needed a much better system to stop that happening again. The format for now is that we've got an hour with three really interesting panelists, Antonia, Dan and Tarek. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in turn, but they've all got really relevant experience and knowledge over the subject of sustainability. And so we'll get them to talk about their experience and their thoughts on sustainability. And then there will probably be, hopefully, a bit of interactive chat between us. So that's the plan. And so sticking to our time and an hour to go, I'm going to start with Tarek, who has written on the subject of global sports, writes for New York Times, has talked about the murky world of football finance, and has delved into it in some depth. So over to you, Tarek, if you can give us your introduction and also what you've picked up on your inquiries around football, around sustainability.
Hi, Thea. Thanks for the intro. I think you've made it for me a little bit there. Yeah, I'm Tarek Pandra. I'm a sports journalist, really looking at the off-field, the unsexy part of the game until it has suddenly, roared into focus in the last year or two. For the last couple of decades, really, the intersection of money, politics, governance, etc., really focusing on the governing bodies, but more at an international level, FIFA and UEFA in particular, and the structures that have kind of allowed the game to get to where it is, both the successes of the game, but also the subjects we're talking about, I suppose, today. As far as I'm concerned, what's been very clear is there needs to be structural reform from top to bottom, be it at a national level and at an international level. And I think you can kind of extrapolate what happens high up the pyramid at the top, all the way to the other parts of the game. And one of the things that I kind of have learned more and more is this issue of conflicts of interests and the structure of governance. And I'll give you, I know we're talking about EFL here, but I think some of the points will be relevant. And I want to use the example of UEFA, for example, here. It is the European football's governing body. But what does that mean? It arranges two of the most important tournaments in the world. At national level, we're going to have the Euros starting in a week. And at club level, the Champions League. So it is responsible for putting on these premier events, which essentially involve having some of the most popular clubs on the planet, if they're in Europe, in this competition, or national team when it comes to the Euros. And it's selling broadcast rights. It is a entertainment company in this sense. It is selling rights to television companies on the one hand, and it needs to create this product with the best performers in it. On the other hand, it has this role of European football regulator. This is the same organization that is putting this competition on, requiring these teams to be in it. And on with another kind of fork, it is the regulator of these teams. Now, what we've seen, it seems very, very difficult for UEFA to regulate its biggest participants. We've seen financial fair play cases, for example, involving big beasts, Paris Saint-Germain, Manchester City recently, AC Milan, etc. And they've been unable to punish these teams. And you say, have they been unable to, or have they not wanted to? And there is this kind of murkiness, a lack of transparency around these processes that create doubts. And I think at EFL level as well, you as far as fans are concerned, you have years go by where a potential investigation starts, etc. As far as the public is concerned, from what they read, or as fans are concerned, this seems to be open and shut cases, and then things just seem to disappear into the ether. Either action is taken years down the line, or not taken at all. And a third pillar for these organizations is a development function. And I will say both for FIFA and UEFA, their reason to be is to grow the game. I mean, I think that might be FIFA's slogan, or one of their slogans. If that is your reason to be, you are essentially a development organization, which means dispensing all of this cash all over Europe, all over the world, and as far as the FA is concerned, across England. In terms of transparency of this process, where the money goes, why it goes where it goes, and how it fits into the political dimension. These people are all kind of elected, like we have general elections in the UK and elsewhere every few years, and it's curious to see where the money goes and who votes for whom. So to kind of bring this to a close, I think the structures that we have are not fit for the game we have today, and we really need to look at it. Things need to be broken down. You need to have regulation, both at national level or international level, that is purely focused on regulating. That would be an organization or a company, whatever you want. Its sole goal is to regulate football, not to organize tournaments and regulate football, not to dispense cash and regulate football, just this mission. And they have to be independent of the other structures. Otherwise, you have conflicts of interest that it doesn't matter who you put in charge of these organizations, no one is impervious to the structure that they're put in. And I think we've seen that happen, and I think change needs to be made. I'll hand that back to you there, Ian.
Thanks, Tarek. So that's a pretty clear view that you put forward, that we need an independent regulator.
Yeah, yes, but what that means and what it looks like, I think that's for me, that's the debate. Both above international organizations and at national level. For example, the Premier League or investigations process as well. We see very little, but it's not very transparent. And again, this is self-regulating. The Premier League, for example, is an organization which is owned by its member clubs. They're self-regulating, and as fans or as outsiders, you do scratch your head and wonder, you know, how are these decisions coming to mind? And the kind of punitive element isn't there, because, you know, they're all wondering, oh God, it could be us next week. So let's not. And I don't think that is a way to run a sustainable football competition.
Okay, thank you. Well, sustainable football competition neatly leads me into Dan. Dan is senior lecturer in sport finance at Sheffield Hallam, and I know has been involved with EFL last year in looking at salary caps, has got a lot of insight into football finance. So Dan, taking on the theme of sustainability in your world and football finance, what are your thoughts as to how we progress it? But first of all, what's your background?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me on the call. Delighted to be part of this movement with Fair Game. Just in terms of my background, yeah, very briefly, as Ian's introduced, I senior lecturer in sport finance at Sheffield Hallam University. My teaching and research areas are in finance, economics, and governance of professional team sports. Of course, we always end up back at governance when we're talking about these issues, as we have done already this morning. So my PhD was also in that area, and since then I've wrote regularly for academic journals, for sport business textbooks, consulting with professional clubs and leagues, as Ian mentioned, with the EFL, and commentate on numerous pieces in the media as well around the finances of football. So yeah, that's my kind of background. And I think, Ian, just to build on where we've come from already this morning, and we were having a brief chat on the phone yesterday around this session to kind of set it up. When we talk about sustainability, and if we strip it right back to the financial aspect in almost finance 101, in a business, you're looking for two things. Is the selling price higher than the cost? And can you pay your debts as they fall due? And I think if we look at that in a football context, yes, we know they're not normal businesses. But if we look at player wages, then the selling price is not higher than the cost, because what we see is that the single biggest cost to a football club is its player wages, and that's outstripping revenue in a lot of cases, certainly in English football, and worryingly further down the league system as well, where the revenues aren't as high. So we have a big problem with player wages that we have to look at under a sustainability, any sustainability system. And the other one around, can you pay your debts as they fall due, leads us back into the ownership thing that, you know, that Darren very emotionally and brilliantly outlined this morning with Beret, is a lot of the time these clubs are reliant on their owners to continue pumping money in, and there are good and bad owners within that system. Of course, we know that, but the question there becomes, what happens if the owner can't continue to pump the money in or doesn't want to anymore? And that might be a product that sits outside of the football club's control, because it could be that it's linked to the owner's businesses, and if those businesses fail, then the club fails as a result. So I think those would be two things for me that we could look at from a sustainability point of view around the finances of the income statement and the balance sheet. Of course, we have to be mindful of the governance aspect of this, because I've said numerous times that these clubs are operating financially within the constraints or lack of constraints that the governance system of the league or the leagues that they're trying to get into. So we have to be mindful of that as well. But those are two things that I think always come to the fore with any discussion around sustainability.
You've looked at football finance really carefully, possibly more than anyone else who'd be on this call or in these webinars. Can you just, so that we can put some flesh on the bones really and understand the scale of the problem, can you give some insight into the level of difference between player pay and revenue of clubs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing as well, of course, is the financial gap between the leagues themselves, which again is a very important point for the English football industry, because it's that causes, or certainly in a lot of the clubs, if you look into the numbers, it's that overstretching. You almost need to overstretch to get there, and that's obviously the fan side of things. Is as fans of our clubs, we want our clubs to get to the next level. We're always looking for the promotion, or we're looking for the next step, and that does come at a cost. But I think if you look at the Championship, is probably the best example of this in English football, because it's just an absolute financial basket case in some instances. And you've got the majority of clubs in that league in any given season, you've got wages to turnover ratios that are in excess of 100%. And in some instances, you know, even take Brentford as an example, that have been very, people have been very complimentary of the model of Brentford. And, you know, there are some benefits within that model of buying talent and selling it on, and it's data driven. But their wages to turnover ratio has been in excess of 150% for the last 2 or 3 years. So they are still spending big on wages to try and get to the next level. And that comes with a financial gap between the leagues. But I think if you look at across the board, if we took the wages to turnover ratios of all the clubs in the Football League, and we have this kind of recommended ratio from Deloitte and the leagues themselves saying that it should be no higher than 70%, there's only a very small percentage of clubs that hit that 70% threshold. In the Championship, that would have been 3 out of 24 clubs for the last couple of seasons would hit that marker, and the rest are far above that. So I think that wages to turnover ratio there, you can see, is across the board, it is just a real problem in the Football League.
Yeah, just so it's a mind-boggling number, really. Just to be clear, what we're saying is Brentford have spent on players 150% of their revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you the exact figures for full clarity. So at the last set of accounts, the turnover was 15.9 million and the wage bill was 29.5 million. You know, I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan. It's up there on the Fair Game website, and I'll not shy away from that. But the wage bill at Sheffield Wednesday for the last set of accounts was 43 million against a turnover of around 22, 23 million. It's even anyone with, you know, that's not necessarily trained in finance understands that is a problem. You know, even the fans that don't care one little bit about the finances of the club would still look at those two figures and go, well, you know, how is that happening? How have we got to this point? And of course, then the knock-on effect is, when does that become a big problem? And it becomes a big problem with potential relegations or owners not having the money to put in anymore, or etc. And that's when we come back to this thing of, so the clubs themselves are actually not self-sustainable, not against the definitions we've put forward this morning.
Yeah, without wishing to labour the point, that difference is just about player pay. They've still got to have a pitch to play on and a stadium that is functional and have staff who can man it. That's just spending on player pay. Absolutely, yeah. One of the things that's often talked about in relation to football finance, and I know Rick Parry at the EFL has been really keen on, and he's spoken to government committees on this point, is the effect of parachute payments. What effect do parachute payments have, and are they such a distortion as Rick Parry says they are?
Yes, I think they are, Ian. We did a piece of research on parachute payments that was published a couple of years ago, and we looked at kind of a 10-year picture and clubs that have them versus those that don't. And what we found within that data was that statistically, clubs that had them were twice as likely to get promoted back to the Premier League. They were twice less likely to get relegated further down into League One. And if you look at that from a points differential, we actually found that the clubs that have them, on average, were gaining 5 points more per season than those that don't. So I would certainly subscribe to the argument that they are not fit for purpose. If it was me, I'll be honest, I'd get rid of them completely. I think that's something that we should be considering, or redistribute more of that money further down the Football League, even if it's in an equal payment to every single club. You know, parachute payments are currently around £90 million over 3 years to one club. So even, you know, 90 divided between the 72 would still be a little bit of a boost, and actually a really substantial amount of money to some of the clubs in League One and League Two. So that's something that we've called for. You could also look at a handicap system within that if you look at a points differential, and you could say, if clubs want the parachute payments, they have to start the league season on -5. You're never going to get the clubs to agree to that, of course, but this is using the numbers to try and generate some form of discussion around how we can change it. And I think we can change the regulations. We all know we can, but as Darren was alluding to this morning, it needs that collective buy-in of the clubs, because these are member organisations as much as anything, and the clubs vote on policies and practices at league level, and we need that collective buy-in to stimulate some real change. But it is possible, and that's just one example there of something that you could do in relation to parachute payments.
And one of the reason given for parachute payments, going back through the years, was, well, if clubs get relegated, they've got large wage bills to contend with, and it's to help them run down the contracts of those large wage bills. In my previous life, before being chief executive at Cambridge United, I spent over 30 years as an employment lawyer. And isn't one of the very simple things that clubs can do is just put a relegation clause in to say that pay drops when they drop down the league?
Yeah,
but they won't do that, Ian. They just don't think they will do that, because they won't. They don't think the others will do that. There's a trust deficit in football. To the point you were making, yes, they could all agree to do all of these things, but they haven't, and they don't. There's a reason for that, because they don't trust each other.
Yeah.
Which means.
But Tarek, yeah, on your point earlier, though, that's the sort of thing that an independent regulator could impose.
You speak. It's totally sensible, isn't it? Like, if you're going to go down, your revenues change, so your pay structure would change. In a normal business, that is exactly what would happen. But we are not in a normal environment here with this, and these people cannot be trusted to do the right thing, because we've been talking about these things for 20 years. Yes, yeah. We've had this sudden debate for two reasons. We've had the pandemic, we've had Project Big Picture, and ESL, for example, so it's sort of focused the minds. But we kind of have been on these journeys before, and it's an interesting moment where there seems to be a lot of momentum. But the idea that these people are going to do the right thing, I think, is fantasy. Not going to happen. It has to be imposed on, because obviously, if your revenue drops by half, you cannot pay those salaries. So I would ask, to the point you said, Brentford 150% of their wage turnover in salaries here. Is there not a rule? And if there isn't a rule, why is there not a rule from whoever's running that league to say you cannot spend 150% of your revenue on player salaries, because that is the road to ruin? Because what's the worst thing that happens to the individual? He declares bankruptcy, but to the club, it is 100 years of history gone down the toilet, probably, because someone had a dream of getting promoted or under fan pressure. That is no way to run a football business. And you've seen a lot of collapses over the years. Why is there not a rule on wage to turnover? You're chairman of a football club there. You might know the answer to that. Why do you guys not have a rule on that?
I'm the chief exec, not the chairman. That's somebody else's job. But we've got regulation about financial fair play and salary monitoring, SCMP, as it's called. Dan, can you give us a quick explanation as why these rules don't work?
Yeah, I think, again, that's one of my bugbears with regulation, Tarek. So the wage instance in would be tied up in financial fair play, but obviously financial fair play is measured against acceptable losses. So that would be a part of it, because spending over and above on wages would hit the bottom line. But in the Championship, that's 39 million cumulative over 3 seasons. And they don't have the same thing in League One and League Two. So there is no financial fair play in League One and League Two, but there is, as Ian said, a salary cost management protocol, which is set at 60% of revenue for League One clubs and 55% of revenue for League Two clubs, with some stipulations either way. But I think one of the challenges here, and Ian, I'm sure you've seen this at Cambridge and in those leagues, is SCMP is not really enforced. It's not been enforced very well. We've seen FFP enforced at Championship level, but we've also seen clubs try to circumvent that by selling their stadiums. The case of Sheffield Wednesday, Derby. So the clubs are always looking for a way around the regulations. And I think that's one of the big challenges as well for the English football industry, certainly. And you talked about UEFA at the start. We have these regulations, but they're not consistent across the board. And in some cases, that's okay, because the leagues are different. But there's also a lot to be said for having some consistency in those regulations, or at least having a variation of the same thing across different leagues. But I think that comes back to the point around the problem, as much as anything, is the financial gap between the leagues, because that's what's driving some of the regulations that we do have that aren't necessarily managed effectively, but also it's forcing the clubs, or if they really want to, it's pushing them into that place where they do overstretch themselves to try and make the next jump. Salary caps as well is something we've talked about a lot in English football, but has never happened, and that's something that could control the wages to turnover ratio to a certain extent. But again, the clubs have never agreed on whether or not that should be set a percentage of turnover, whether or not it should be a fixed cap, and those conversations have often fell apart because of that. So potentially,
Dan, just picking up on that, the salary cap, because we did have for a short while last season a salary cap. Leagues 1 and League 2 voted to have it 1.5 million in League 2. I think it's 2 million in League 1. But the PFA objected to it, and because of the negotiating agreement with the PFA, effectively they took it to arbitration, and that was thrown out. And again, that speaks to a reason for having an independent regulator that could actually impose some form of salary regulation. What you're talking in terms about SCMP, one of the problems there is it's forward-looking. So you're guessing what your income's going to be, and it's a bit of a open route to change the numbers, to guess that you're going to do better than you will do, and therefore you can pay more on players, and you end up in the Bury situation where they were getting promotion and not paying the players. So we do need a much tighter link, I think, between revenue earned, possibly gate receipts, and the amount you can pay to players. We'll come back to this because we've got a short while yet, but I want to bring in Antonia, who's works in Europe. Her organisation has given money to help in terms of fan engagement, and you've got experience across different jurisdictions. So Antonia, can you give us your thoughts on sustainability as you see it in a wider European context?
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me. Well, the good and the bad thing about coming in last is that I have tons of comments of things that I want to say to Tarek and also to everybody else that spoke earlier today. Just before I forget, maybe, and talk about SD Europe on the salary cap, on the European level, there's a lot of talk about this at the moment. And UEFA has hinted that they are looking at it too. The European leagues are in support of it. FIFPro, the players union, say we can talk about it, but there are other ways around it, like collective bargaining agreements and so on. But it is definitely on the agenda. And just like with financial fair play, there's obviously then the most likely effect of it trickling down throughout the pyramids. But that's just a comment. But there's definitely more to come on that, and maybe Tarek can say more on that as well. But okay, just very quickly, I, together with my brilliant team that was scattered across Europe, we run SD Europe. We are a European fans organization representing mainly national supporters organizations from across Europe, but also community-run football clubs. Through those, we represent over 600 groups, 50-odd clubs. We work in Africa, Asia, America, but mostly mainland Europe, meaning UEFA's Europe, which is much bigger anyway. But the core of what we do in trying to achieve is to get supporters involved in decision-making on all levels, club level, national associations, leagues, and also UEFA. And maybe I start from the top. We are going to be involved in this huge consultation process that UEFA will start earlier next month. It's the UEFA Convention. It's obviously not an independent review of the governance of football. So there's some skepticism around it, but the idea is to look together with all stakeholders, whether that's agents, obviously clubs, leagues, players, and the fans, to long-term reforms. And the reason why we're part of it is that the penny has dropped over the last decade that supporters are stakeholders and stakeholders need to be involved, and nobody's arguing that anymore. I was in expert groups at the European Commission 10 years ago where fans weren't even considered. Somebody just basically put me there because they felt we needed to be there, and from there the whole thing started, you know, like there was nothing there. That really has changed now. You see that with the pressure around the European Super League, this is a little bit more in the press, but we're doing this for over 10 years with great success, but also its challenges, and I happily talk about this. You mentioned the 1.45 million. Obviously, we are not about money. So the money that we generate is from EU funding for the better football. And all of these 1.45 million that we generated and passed on over the last 4 years was to get supporters involved in the governance structures of football. So these projects that we work on all group different stakeholders. So Darren said that earlier, if you have a supporter director on the board, it doesn't work if nobody wants him or her there. You need to change culture and you need to train people, and it's a long educational process. So with national associations at the moment, we finance a project where we do some couple therapy between national associations and national fans organizations, where they talk about their problems of the past and how they can include supporters in the structures of national associations as trusted partners. We do a lot of training with clubs and supporters around how to manage volunteering, how to manage membership, because we predominantly work with democratically run football clubs. We are developing a database for our members, so supporters organizations, to organize their membership better, but also for the clubs in our network. This is for free, and it's been designed with them, or it's currently designed with them, to meet everybody's needs. All of the clubs that I know of are to an extent dependent on their volunteers. And we heard this earlier, you have so many skilled people in your membership or in your fan base, but how do you make use of them? How do you get them to really contribute to the club? And it seems still that very often I need to justify that if you go to the stadium and there's 3,000 or 30,000 people there, you don't have 30,000 beer drinking idiots sitting there. There's a lot of skill. So it's a lot about how do you engage people in the management of the club, in the different structures of the club. And I'm sure we talk about this at some point. Having a director on the club board representing supporter interests is one thing you can do. And that should happen, but it can't be the only way of involving supporters. You don't do just that and then you don't engage. And we heard from Mark Bradley earlier that it's a holistic thing. It's much more than that. Perhaps also what I want to say is that the climate seems to change. We ran, and that's only one example really, but we ran a podcast series last year where we interviewed all of the different stakeholders about, you know, the Super League and also what they think needed to happen in football to make it better. And all of them, whether that was the UEFA president or it was executives of big German football clubs, Swedish clubs, supporter reps, who else? Players Union, MEPs from the European Parliament. Everybody agreed supporters need to be in there. So what is happening over the decade now is that there is already a lot happening, and it seems that you just need to add a little bit of seasoning now to take it to the next level, really, and make it a superb dish. So this mix is part of the mix, and this is part of making a club sustainable. And then you can have all sorts of ways of engaging supporters, which you should have. One of them, for example, being the supporter liaison officer, something that we got into UEFA licensing over a decade ago. And back then, the reason for having this person in place was that we felt we needed to increase the pressure on clubs to speak to their fans, to consider them as important. Now, 10 years on, we can think about something that says in UEFA licensing, you need to have fans involved in your governance structures. And we're discussing this with our members at the moment because we want to speak to UEFA about it. We already started doing that. So I'm speaking very fast, I realize.
Well, can I come back to you on one point then about fans on board? And I say at Cambridge United, we have a fan on the board, has been elected for some years. He's also the SLO and does a really, really great job. So we get it and we see the benefit of it. But I know of other clubs who are anxious about fans putting somebody on the board, and with good reason, because boards are chosen largely for people with their ability, or should be. And if fans can put anybody on the board, that can completely destroy the good, efficient running of the board. So I know your thought is perhaps they should just be brave and take the chance. But what are clubs doing that is beneath that level, which is still valuable, such as you mentioned advisory boards? Can you give some examples of involvement of fans in governance structures, which not necessarily means being on the board?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple of things. First of all, I want to say to what you said just now is that there seems to be like a different way of looking at how fan reps are doing on the board and other board members are doing on the board. What I hear a lot is that people are worried that supporter representatives will leak information to the supporters from the board. Whilst, and we spoke about this yesterday, I know of clubs where board members, not fan reps, are leaking live to journalists while they are in the board meeting. So this is something that has nothing to do with where people are coming from. I think it's something in the environment that needs to change. When you look at Sweden, for example, where the league, the club, and the National Association all say fans are at the center of everything we do. Fans know that. They have a direct line. They have, it's probably the most fan-friendly and most sustainable way of running football that I know of in Europe. That's what makes the difference. So let's say you do not put fans at the center of everything. There are different ways of starting to engage, and the SLO is one, an advisory board is another. You could think about a youth liaison person who's particularly focusing on the next generation of supporters that all of the clubs really need to look at more, something that we're looking at very closely at the moment at SD Europe. The community development officer that Mark talked about is also a good idea, but ultimately, really, you need the representation on the board because this is where the decisions are made. So how do you make sure that there's good performance on the board? That's really the question. And there is not that much research out about this just yet. But the little that is out there, and there's one article that you should read, it's in the Sport Management Review, the role and performance of supporter directors. It was issued last month, and it's definitely worth a read. It focuses on Scottish clubs. And now I lost it. What was I going to say? Yes, is the ability to build a binding relationship and a binding social relationship between the different board members. You need to get the buy-in and develop a certain level of trust. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Something interesting that a fan representative on the board of Malmö, the biggest Swedish club, said to me some time ago, and he's a professor of economics at Malmö University. He said that the board should primarily act as a body, and that fan directors are not fan reps. There's a misperception about fan representatives on the board. You, Ian, must have better or good experiences with the person on your board, but there seems to be this perception, and the fan representative also should not be just saying what the fans want him to say or her. And they can, at the same time, they cannot operate in isolation. I think we can all agree, even without being in that position, that it is a pretty tough job. On the one hand, representing the supporters' interests, and on the other, sitting on a board where some decisions are not aligned with the interests of the supporters in some cases. So this is tough. And what we do is we provide training for those. And I know that this is happening in the UK as well, whether this is in Scotland or here in England. But this is not just training for those who represent fans' interests on board, but we also need education for those board members who are already there. There needs to be a change in perception, and you need to allow, at least at the starting point, for a level of trust, clean sheet, and whoever represents the interests of the supporters, of course, has to bring skills. That's insights and I don't know, whatever skills are missed on the board of football clubs. But in general, I think that we just need to move away from this idea that you get a spy, you let a spy into your board, because that's not...
You make the point very well, and as I've said, we have a good one so that we know that they can work. Tarek, did you want to come in?
Yeah,
there?
I just wondered, this idea of fans is quite a broad. Who counts? Who's in this who is the fan? Is it the season ticket holder? Is it the person who's watching on television? Is it the occasional match goer? It's quite a broad church, football fan. And I wonder where these people are selected from and who we're talking about. Because, you know, from our work, you talk to 50 different fans, you get 50 different answers sometimes about what they want, etc. So how do you kind of get to a kind of fan-oriented view when we need to understand who the fan is first? Do we know who the fan is that we're talking about, is my question here.
No, it's a really good question. And that's really why this is so complex. Because we always say that there is no such thing as a one fan. We all know that. And you just described it as well. And there's a notion, particularly amongst stakeholders, that there is the one fan, there's the global fan. This is the fan that we need to focus on. But obviously, you have a different culture at every single club. You don't have the one fan at one club. You have different fan cultures, scenes, and whatever at just one club. And then imagine you look at it on from a national level, and then the European. It's a very crazy mix. And this evening, when we talk with some national groups in our membership about how do we include in regulation that fan representation in governance structures needs to happen, we will talk about how this can look like and what the processes could be. I know at Cambridge United, Ian mentioned yesterday, I didn't know that somebody's appointed. And at other clubs, different, sort of acknowledged supporters organizations might decide that they set up a voting process, or that they set up an umbrella organization who then puts somebody forward. We also work with groups who do not want to be on the board, but they want to have a different way of engagement. But I think it's time to provide a sort of entrance level, and in the end, it's the supporters, the mix of supporters at Liverpool, or the mix of supporters at my club, Werder Bremen, who then, well, we own the club, but who then make this happen. I can't say, and even on the European level, you have different supporters organizations covering different areas, also different types of supporters, sometimes the same, sometimes different. I think it's important to understand that there's no key to unlock it, but there's certainly a way to open the door, and then to allow the different cultures that exist at different clubs to make the most of an opportunity.
Antonio, would you say that fan engagement at board level, or at whatever level through the club, the more fan engagement there is an outturn in terms of better engagement with fans, bigger fan bases, bigger attendances? Does that follow for you? That was a point that was being made earlier this morning by Mark. Yeah,
I mean, giving you two examples that you know about here in this country too. We're working very closely, for example, with a community club in Israel. It's a club for Arabs, Jews, everybody who lives and breathes in Jerusalem, who do amazing work. And they started many years ago playing against Bedouin teams in the desert. And now they were promoted to the top division of Israeli football. They are purely community. Everything they do is aligned with what's needed in Jerusalem. and they really meet those needs. They're an incredible story. If you have the chance to look them up, Upwell Jerusalem, it's an emotional journey. Then another club in our membership, Omonia, had to start the same way. They had to start again because the club went bust, and they too only were able to lift the spirit and to grow, and now we're relegated to the 2nd division. They had to start at the 5th because of their focus on community and really putting the supporters at the heart of it. And then you look at attendance figures in Germany, and you can argue, you know, we all know about 50+1 and the majority of the clubs being a member on how high attendance is. Like there is evidence for that. And I think ultimately what we need to understand is it's only beneficial. It's not a risk. It really isn't a risk. And I think from that we need to move on, that there's really an opportunity also for all the clubs in the EFL to really embrace it. It's a big opportunity. And I think we all saw that we need the community, particularly during COVID. Otherwise, we're all going to be doomed.
So picking up that, I want to come to Dan on the sustainability point of getting more fans in stadiums, because EFL clubs don't generally sell out to their capacity. I suspect it's probably 50, 60%. So if they could get to 100% or 90%, it would make a big difference to them. How much difference do you think that could make in terms of helping clubs be more sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, just to come back to what Antonio was talking about there as well, we're back to ownership structure in some ways there as well, because one of the challenges with that is, what do you do if you've got a club that has one owner and it's his or her way or the highway? They don't even have a board, really. It's just the owner of that club makes all the decisions. And we have got instances of that in English football, and that's a challenge. And Nigel's made a very good point there in the chat around supporters trust movements, and we've seen a lot of those do some really good work over the years, and trying to make that connection with the club, but from afar, rather than trying to potentially get on the board or have a say in at that level. But there are challenges within that link to owners, and again, that comes back to the finances of what some of these owners are there to do or what they want to do, because you don't make money out of football clubs. This notion of profit maximization only really applies to some of the big six at the top of the Premier League, and even then some of those are loss making. So it's the owner motives as well that are important, and often as fans we are quite fickle within that, and I class myself in that category at times, because if you can see money being invested into the club to try and get better players, to try and chase the dream of promotion, if things are going well, people don't complain about the way the club's being run. It's only when things go bad that people start to look at the owner and costs and the player wages and everything else that goes into the mix. So that's also important. But to answer your point, Ian, briefly on attendances, yes, I think we know that clubs further down the league system, we've seen this because of COVID, they are more reliant on the fans and match day attendance than the Premier League clubs, because of the broadcasting money in the Premier League as an example. So we know that they are more reliant, and we know that these stadiums are not selling out. We know that there might be a bit of anxiety around getting back to normal life post-COVID. So there might be a couple of years down the line before we really start to see normal fans, if we get to that point, returning. But fans will return, fans will support their club, fans will put money into season tickets and buying tickets. If one or two things are met. I think one is the price reasonable first and foremost, and in instances at clubs where they've raised ticket prices, perhaps that's not gone down very well. The other is potentially, do they buy into the vision of the club that Mark was talking about earlier? Are the fans and the club in this together? And the third one, quite simply, is performance on the pitch, because no matter what fan base, no matter what size stadium you have or where you're from, your attendances will get better if you are near the top of the league table. And that brings us full circle to that cost money, and that money for the most part has been in the form of player wages, but that's a problem. So there's a lot of clashing of ideals there, but yeah, I think obviously it's an important point around football clubs needing their fans, especially further down the league system.
Dan,
Antonio, I'll come to you just 1 second. We've got a few minutes left. What I'm going Tarek, just
Dan,
hang on a minute, Tarek. I'll come back to Antonio, then Tarek.
Okay.
And then I just want to let you know, I want to leave a little space before we hand back to Niall for each of you to give the one measure that you would advocate if you're sitting in front of Tracy Crouch to say we want to make football more sustainable. What is the one measure that you would advocate? So I'll hand it to Antonio, and then Tarek, and then we'll go around through. So Antonio, over to you.
Yeah, just very briefly about something that Dan said earlier. Yes, I mean, we hope that supporters come back to the grounds. But I had a few weeks ago with the fan department at Borussia Dortmund, and they employ 10 supporter liaison officers. They take this seriously. But they have seen, not just before, this was already before COVID, that less and less young people are involved in attending the games. The average age is going down. And we're talking one of the most attended clubs in Europe. There is a worry there that they don't come back this way. And there are tons of studies out there about the mental health issues that, you know, young people are suffering. Everybody's suffering because of COVID. But, you know, there's also different things to do. Behaviors have changed. There's a real worry there. And they're looking at how they can change that and how they can engage more with their community to ensure they're coming back. And I think that we shouldn't take it for granted that this is happening. In terms of Tracy Crouch, I think for me, it's supporter involvement in governance structures. And then we need to look at how this is done, and that needs to be done together with clubs, supporters, organizations, and other stakeholders. This is something that needs to be discussed jointly, but I think it's time to put something in formally.
Yeah, just actually on the fans coming back, I think it was the president of Real Madrid talked about young people having a short attention span and thought we should make the game shorter, which I suspect most people on this call would not agree with. And as a club who's got quite a few 93-minute winners in the last season, I think we'll stick with 90 minutes for me. Tarek, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just for this idea of a member-owned club versus a proprietor model. From my experience, there isn't one isn't better than the other. Seeing how poorly run some of the biggest clubs in Europe. You look at FC Porto, Benfica, for example, very successful on the field, but the finances are a mess. And the reason is Barcelona as well. I'd add into the mix. Is these are political organisations where you're not spending your own money. You are elected on a promise, pure pork barrel politics often. You've seen the Barcelona elections, not the last one, because the club is about €1 billion in debt, so it'd be madness to say we're about to spend 500 million more. But always is a player. If you elect me to be your president, I'm going to do the world for you. I'm going to bring. I remember Ronaldinho or Beckham or all these. It's easy to spend other people's money, and that goes throughout the club. Because if you look a little bit closer, you look at the sports director model with that member model on top. There is a lot of funky business taking place in football, and there's deals that are made, and because there's no single person losing the money, this kind of behavior, bad behavior, has been allowed to fester for so long. I'm not saying a member model isn't good. What I'm saying again is back to this point of rules, governance, policing, even this stuff. No one is doing it. And to that point, what is the one thing Tracy Crouch could do? I think I telegraphed it pretty much throughout this, is take the enforcement powers away from the current structures and have something else outside of them to regulate and to enforce. You can have all the best rules in the world, but if you refuse to enforce the rules for whatever political reason, you're going to have a mess, and that's where we are. So yeah, someone outside of the current structure to regulate and to enforce. There you go.
Yeah, actually, speaking to Tracy Crouch did speak to The Athletic, I think, on a podcast, and said she was in favour of an independent regulator. And I guess then the devil's in the detail of what the regulator does. Yeah. So Tarek, we've noted down all you've said, and we'll hopefully get it over to Tracy so that she can you can recognise your words coming back in the regulations. Dan, what would be your key thing sitting in front of Tracy? What is going to is there one thing that's going to make a really big difference?
Yeah, I think the independent regulator, as Tariq said, is something that we all think would make a difference. I suppose on a financial level underneath that, if we look at things as they are, I'd advocate two things that are kind of tied together, and back to where I started with this conversation. So looking at the numbers, you could redistribute some of the broadcasting revenue more equally around the English football system, and an effective cost management form of effective cost management regulation, be that a salary cap or variance of. So one thing that would help revenues across the board and also control costs a little bit.
Okay, I've had one comment that Tracy Crouch was not in favour of an independent regulator. Sorry if I've misread that. I'm sure we'll clarify it over the next few weeks. But clearly it is one of the things that is going to be looked at really, really carefully. Thank you all very much for your contributions. This is an ongoing discussion that's going to take a while, but not that long, because Tracy is going to produce her interim report beginning of July, and then hoping to do a final report in the autumn. And that contrasts greatly with the Premier League, who was saying back in November and December, when the EFL were in discussions about some rescue fund from the Premier League, that there would be a thorough review of football. It was going to be all-embracing review, and they were going to crack on with it early in the new year. That's early in 2021, January, February time, and nothing has happened. And it does speak to the inertia that we have in football, that actually people say things perhaps under pressure at a particular time, and then nothing changes. And I think actually at the moment we have, it's a watershed where things are going to change. I think Super League, it's probably best to call it Super League rather than European Super League, because I'm pretty sure that was intended to be a global league. The mess that created, it does create an opportunity for a look at how we govern football, and it has really turbocharged that drive. So that is what is giving us hope in Fair Game, that there's something that can be done to change how football is governed and make it more sustainable, because we cannot have the situation where we continue to lose great clubs, as we have done in recent years, knock them down from Bury down to step 6 in the Football League. So there is room for hope, and discussions like this, high-end discussions like this, are really, really helpful. So thank you all, and thank you all to those who contributed. I see there have been a number of points made whilst we've been talking. Now I'm going to pass you back to Neil, who is going to wrap up. We've got 3 minutes or so. So Neil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you hugely to Antonia, to Dan, to Tariq for your views. This is the start of a conversation, so obviously we're very keen to develop realistic things. There's been some really great points on here, and Fair Game's ambition is really to develop those top-line solutions quickly, and then put the details into those to make sure we feed effectively into what we believe could be a proper change in the governance of football in England and Wales. So that's a huge thank you for that. A huge thank you to Ian for chairing this session. Ian has been absolutely invaluable behind the scenes. He's been reaching out to a lot of clubs, and his advice in how Fair Game is developed is absolutely invaluable, as are all the clubs that have joined Fair Game, as we try and bring together a consensus about how we can take the game forward. So with that, I will just say big thank you again. We'll be back for those of you in the expert session at 1:30. We have more sessions. We've got one more session tomorrow, where we'll be looking a little bit more about practicalities of sustainability, and then one next week on Thursday, the 10th of June, also looking at the league structure and really finalising how we can embed those solutions and what they look like. So there's come some really exciting stuff. You can get all the details obviously by following us on Twitter, Fair Game UK. Do follow us there, and obviously feel free to get in touch with myself or Ian or any of the Fair Game people, and we'll be taking this on board and developing realistic solutions. It's an exciting time for all of us. Thank you again, Ian. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you for listening in. Those of you who are in for the afternoon session, we begin again at 1:30, so you've got an hour. And for everybody else, do log into some of those other sessions, and we'll speak to you all soon. Thank you very much. Cheers.